Hello, everyone, and welcome to this analysis of XAT 2021. Let's understand what the entire paper was like. So, a very pleasant experience compared to the last couple of years. Not just in terms of how it was organized, but also in terms of the overall paper itself. It was a very standard paper, standardized paper. The sectionals were, of good quality questions. And the best thing about this was that it was error free, which is definitely something that XAT has been known for in the past, except for the last 2 years where there were minor glitches. Last year, there was this issue with the negative marking not showing on some questions. And the year before that, there were remarks made, very strong remarks made about the quality of decision making questions, or rather, how these questions had been borrowed from earlier papers. So compared to those 2 years, definitely this time XAT paper or XAT 2021 was a great experience, very well organized. And the most interesting thing about this year's paper was that a quite unprecedented revelation of the format was done, in advance. Never has XAT done this earlier. So that was very interesting. So what was the paper like? It had two time-bound parts. Part one, VALR, had 26 questions, and the entire part actually had a total of 75 questions. 26 questions of VALR, verbal ability and logical reasoning, 21 questions of decision making, 28 questions of QA plus DI, making for 75 questions totally. And the time allocation was 165 minutes, 1 mark for every correct answer, 0.25 negative mark for every incorrect answer, 0.10, 0.10 deducted for every unattempted question after 8 questions. Part 2 was a time-bound 15 minutes general knowledge sectional of 25 questions. Let's understand each sectional in great detail. So, what was the overall pattern of verbal ability? 26 questions, and compared, considering that we're looking at a total time of 165 minutes, a recommended time here is about 50 to 55 minutes, especially those extra 5 minutes recommended because yes, there was some trickiness here. Okay, there were about 15 questions of RC, so heavier on the RC side, 6 RCs in fact, plus that poem which normally gets counted along with the RCs. So a total of 17 questions that can be classified as RCs. So 3 RCs with 3 questions each, 3 RCs with 2 questions each, one poem with 2 questions. 3 questions of critical reasoning, which is a come down in comparison to last year, wherein there were 6 questions of CR. So that 3 questions of CR seem to have been converted into another RC here. 2 parajumbles, 3 questions of grammar instead of 2 that we saw last year. And instead of 2 sentence completion vocab based questions, we saw 1 such this year. This sectional overall can be termed a wee bit difficult. It's not classic moderately difficult, but you can certainly sense it to be slightly more difficult than mere moderate because of the trickiness posed by the RCs. The RCs were not lengthy, nor were they heavy reading. There were passages you could read and understand, unlike XAT standards and XAT, historical data, wherein we've seen very heavy, dense RCs. But these RCs you could read, except that the questions and the options, the questions were again straightforward, but the options were very tricky, very close. It actually took you quite some time to eliminate the options and arrive at the correct one. So that also means that in the biggest chunk of questions, my accuracy can have been, hit slightly. That's why we're terming this sectional as a slightly difficult one. Let's look at what the various passages were like. So the first one, psychology, talked about multitasking and how it only has this temporary effect on the brain and makes you feel good, but then overall in terms of completion of a task, completion of goals and tasks, major tasks, multitasking is not a good thing because it just enables you to finish these minor tasks, but the major task or major assignment at hand, which needs to be completed, which needs complete focus, is not achieved. So it actually spoke of multitasking in a negative way, right? Now, roughly around 300 words, you didn't have very lengthy passages, roughly around 300, 320 words or so. The questions here were inferences, and you found this throughout the sectional. Phrase-based inference or a sentence-based inference. What does the author mean when he says this? Now, it's not a very straightforward meaning of the sentence that you can take here, nor is it a straightforward, meaning of the phrase that you can consider here, because it's to be understood in the context of the entire passage, and that made it quite challenging. There were quite a number of essence of the passage, or something on the lines of what is the author trying to convey through this passage. So there were a lot of such questions too. So that's what made these questions slightly challenging. However, RC1, because the topic was fairly relatable, you'd find that the questions can also be marked as moderate. One of the inference based questions could have been challenging. So generally overall this was moderate, something doable. RC2, which spoke of environment and ecology, it talked about how it's not just the human being who uses numbers or numerical ability, but how in biology among animals too, we find the use of numbers for survival. Again, roughly around 300 odd words, 3 questions. The questions were largely again inference based, inferences, general inferences, or phrase based, sentence based inferences, and essence of the passage. Once again, moderate. I think one of these inferences was quite tricky, but overall we are going to take it as moderate. All right. Next, RC3, was quite abstract. If you missed this idea of absent present, how data about women has never been recorded historically, making decision making a complicated thing, or rather making decision making algorithms and artificial intelligence and all of that one-sided, because the sense of women and women's experiences has never been recorded. That was the idea. So feminism, the topic, 300 odd words, 3 questions. Uh, Overall, this can actually should be marked tricky, because this play on words, absent, present, and 2 questions actually which asked you what this sentence means or what this phrase means, was very difficult to figure out. What does the author mean when he uses this phrase, absent, present? So figuring that out was pretty challenging. You would have, anyone who took this passage would have spent a lot of time here. So not an easy one, okay? Even if you got in, spent some time, and then came out, realizing that this is slightly abstract and difficult, that would have been a good thing. Because yes, your accuracy could be affected here. You'd spend a lot of time here. RC4, philosophy, uncertainty and doubt for progress. Now, yes, it is tricky because the idea itself is difficult. It is about how uncertainty and doubt, skepticism is a very meaningful thing, because that is what allows us to progress. Otherwise, everything becomes a dead end. The idea might still be picked, and you might be able to go through the passage, because it's a very short one, roughly around 200 words. I think it could even be shorter than that. 2 questions, but both these questions were challenging. One that spoke of, what is the author trying to convey, something on the lines of main idea or essence of the passage. Very tricky one, very tricky. You would spend a lot of time. Even the other inference question was difficult. So tempting to take it because you think it's very short and doable, but it would trap you. Okay. Next, RC5, business management. Very interesting one. It was more like a business case being presented. So you had these 3 paragraphs which were also listed out, and paragraph 1 spoke of, operational downsizing. Paragraph 2 spoke of, marketing shift, and how how Microsoft wished to market Lumia, its mobile phone. And the third paragraph spoke of the impact, therefore, on the overall organization, its resources, and the various branches it had. So the idea of downsizing, but broken into through three parts: operational, marketing, and HR. So very interesting one. It would take you a while to realize, to understand what is happening. Something like this has been seen a couple of years ago, so probably a 4 or 5 years back, where a comparison of, the reports of certain mobile companies that were published in the newspaper were compiled. So what was the strategy and the data, the report released by one mobile company versus the data claimed by another mobile company and a third mobile company, and some sort of comparative understanding. Very interesting. So this was more on that line. It would take you a while to figure out what is happening. But yes, once you figure out, it's a very moderate one, doable. Once you're able to see the distinctness of the three paragraphs, that each paragraph dealt with something distinctly targeted towards an overall downsizing of the organization, or efficient management of the organization, you would get both the questions right. Roughly around 250 plus words, not a very lengthy one again. RC6, philosophy. Truth of life, the real truth of life depends on how we deal with our surroundings. What is the habit we've developed in dealing with our surroundings, and the nature, our nature, that is temperament. Very short one. I don't even think it was 150 words, but just to be on the safer side, I've marked it as 150 words. It might even be, much less than that, roughly around 100 words. But then, reading the passage, getting exactly what it says, and then getting into the questions. The questions would trap you, trick you, because, there are multiple things that could be the answer to those questions. It looks like you can draw the answer from the first sentence or the first two lines. It looks like you can draw the answer from the third and fourth sentence or the later sentences. So that made it very tricky. Okay, so not something that was, you'll find that both these shorter passages were actually very tricky, challenging. Okay, now that was RC. Let's get back to, which ones we could have taken. The poem was Sit by Vikram Seth, yes, our own Indian poet, author and poet. An 8-line poem, this was. Two questions. The first one, the first inference, was a very easy one. But the second one, I'm sure a lot of us would have lost it there, because you don't know what the word grackles means. If you were able to figure out that grackles refers to something in the environment, okay, or especially a bird that we are talking about, then you could get this. Otherwise, you would have, been stuck with the second question. And that's why, yes, it's marked moderate, but the second question is definitely a challenging one. So one easy, one moderate, the other difficult, definitely. Okay. Critical reasoning, 3 questions only of about 100 words. You'll find that all three revolved around the main idea. 2 of them clearly asked what can be concluded from the passage, and one asked you what can be summarized. However, not that any of these questions were very difficult, moderate. Probably there was one, I'm not able to recall the exact details of this question, but there was that one question which would slightly confuse you, where you needed to regress back to the passage and, figure out. So one slightly difficult, but the others were doable. Okay. Next. 3 questions of grammar and 1 question of vocabulary, which is your sentence completion. Easy. Marking it easy because your products can never be new. Your products can only be innovative products. And you create those innovative products to reach out to new markets. The moment you see that, you can easily arrive at the answer. I think that was option 2. Innovative products reaching out to new markets. Nothing else can fit in there. And there was just that one option that gave you this sequence. The other options actually spoke of new products and innovative markets. Markets cannot be innovative. So the moment you pick that, you'll get this. The 3 questions of grammar, absolutely easy. Especially that question tags. Okay, it stands out. Yes, you have this clash with one sentence that uses an indefinite pronoun. I think it was everybody or anybody, one of those pronouns used. And then you have the plural, have they, have they coming in. So that would have confused you slightly, but there was still that one other one wherein the auxiliary isn't mentioned at all. Something else is mentioned. I think that was the last one. So that is very easy. The question on articles, error detection of articles also was very easy. Only that other question, which involved a few mixed concepts, you would have wanted to spend some time thinking. They're slightly moderate, right? But overall, this was a bumper crop that you could cash on. Definitely, you should have taken grammar. In fact, the entire set of VA non-RC questions were something you could definitely bank on. Parajumbles, 2 questions. You've done so many parajumbles by now that you would have found this fairly doable. Even the question marked difficult, it's marked difficult only because those sentences are slightly abstract. The second one. But the first one, I think it came in the other order. The first one was that abstract one. The second was the slightly easier one. 5 sentences only, definitely doable. Even if you just focused on this, whatever is there in this slide, which is 3 questions here, 2 questions here, and one, which is 6 questions, and your parajumbles and your critical reasoning questions, which is another 3, you're looking at 9 questions. Let's consider an accuracy of about 6 or 7 out of 9. Now that itself takes you very close to the expected or target score. The poem, I'm sure you would have related to this poem, other than that one word, grackles. So that is something you would have taken. Definitely at least 1 question you would have taken here, which is like we're targeting a 9 plus 1, 10 questions. Even if we consider RC5, which is the Microsoft RC, which is 2 questions, about 2 questions done here. Maybe none of these, maybe what we saw on the first slide, which is the psychology multitasking passage, as well as the environment in ecology passage. We're looking at a good number of questions being taken. 2 RCs here, 6 questions we've looked at. And then perhaps, even if we've not taken this at all, okay, we're looking at RC5, 2 more questions, and perhaps a few questions here and there. So roughly around 3 RCs, even if you say 6 plus 2, which is 8 questions or 9 or 10, whatever number of RC questions, we still have about 9 questions of VA that we could use. Okay, so that's a good number of questions that you could get into. So yes, meaningfully with the right kind of selection, a lot of things could be done here. Let's understand, so before we go into understanding the number of possible attempts, let's understand what the DM section looked like, okay? So what was the overall pattern? This was very much on the lines of 2020, XAT 2020, though of course, VA was not so much on the lines of XAT 2020, there were slight variations. This was definitely on last year's pattern. We had 21 questions, spread across 7 caselets, and these caselets were business, situational, and I'm going to name one of them as a pure HR caselet. Yes, there were in fact 2 that had, aspects of HR coming in. So 7 such caselets, making for each caselet carried 3 questions, and that made for 21 questions. Suggested time is just a 45 minutes. You could actually manage about 6 caselets very safely in about 40 plus minutes. That still leaves you with another 3-4 minutes extra, with which you could get into the next one. So, time-wise, reading content-wise, the data, common data of the passages-wise, it wasn't heavy. Less data to read. Questions were direct. There were tricky ones, of course. But yes, the options could have confused a lot of you. There could have been problems with certain questions where you had to choose those multiple options and identify the number in descending order, etc. These are definitely tricky things. So overall difficulty level, however, we are going to stick to moderate because a number of at least about 70% of the total questions could be safely taken. And that's why it's moderate. Okay. What were the caselets? So that first caselet, that village of Chaura, I don't know if these words might be incorrectly recalled, names might be incorrectly recalled, but there was this village selling products in the neighboring village through dance, song, and bargaining. Had 3 questions, fairly doable, easy to moderate is what it has been marked as, because straightforward. The questions were straightforward. You could actually, sense the decisions clearly there. Caselet 2 is marked difficult because this one involved, managing the branding of that particular company. I forget the name of the company, but this person, the marketing head, Ashish, so he had to deal with this case of a celebrity who endorsed their product, his company product, and who also endorsed a dictatorial country, which actually led to a social media onslaught and a lot of discussion around what he stands for, his values. So there was a backlash, and that is what Ashish had to manage. So managing the branding image of the company, difficult because at least two of these questions required you to identify multiple options. So wherever you've got to identify those multiple options, it can always be slightly complicated, which is why this has been marked difficult. Caselet 3, the business plus HR decision making, it involved Ashraf and his promotion and his, the task that he carries out given to him by the HR head, etc. 3 questions. 2 of them were moderate. One was the tricky one. I think that one was that last question, which was rather tricky. Caselet 4 is a pure HR decision making case, we can say. This is more to do with the new recruit. So she's a fresher who's been hired by this consultancy. She asks for a client facing role. Only one of these questions was a little time consuming because you had to again identify the number of options, 3 options or 4 options that would answer the question. Otherwise, overall moderate, very limited reading as well. The case itself was a very brief one. Next, caselet 5, a situational decision making. I hope I got this name right, Samardeep, or some name starting with S. His family business and his 3 children, and how he expects his children to take over the business, as well as the personal choices of the children. It involved a discussion of Sandeep. One of the questions had to do with Sandeep and Sandeep's choice of pursuing law and not business management as expected by his father. So these 3 questions have been marked, 2 of them have been marked difficult, particularly both those questions that involved Sandeep's decision, Sandeep's case, choice to go for law. The third question here, wherein, the perspective of the other 2 children was brought in, was very difficult to even understand. You would take 2 minutes to read that question and relate to that, which is why marked difficult. Definitely 2 of these were difficult. Caselet 6 was a fairly easy to moderate one. The passage, the caselet was a little lengthy, but then, it was so real and everyday and something that each one would relate to, So had to do with this faculty delivering lectures, handling a certain topic, and how on the last lecture of that course, her laptop gets damaged because of the play of her children, right? And what are the decisions she must take. So fairly straightforward and could be done easily. It would actually take you less time. If you chose not to get into that because there was lengthy reading, it was a loss. Okay, you had to get into this easy to moderate caselet. The last one, caselet 7, once again, so much to do. 2 of these caselets, one was that, the branding management, Ashishka case, as well as this case, had so much to do with social media. It's just an indication of how things are changing and how our decision making is so dependent on, how the media perceives us, how trends occur in social media, etc. So this had to do with the PK celebrity, of a celebrity by name PK, who was endorsing, the supply of electricity to villages. And it turned out to be a case of, instead of electricity, the village ended up catching fire. So how is this entire case handled both by PK as well as by the company? Okay, so involved social media backlash as well. Interesting one, moderate questions. Moderate because the case was pretty straightforward and could be understood. I think only that one thing wherein you had to decide what would be the strategy he would employ to, when he contests elections, what would be the strategy he would employ? Would he take a tagline of slap to help the poor or something like that? That was a little confusing. Otherwise, yes, these 3 questions were moderate. Okay, so now let's look at the expected attempts of VA. 5 questions can be marked easily, roughly about around 4 or 5 questions were definitely easy. We've seen that those 3 grammar questions, the vocab question, all of these have been marked easy. So 5 questions easy, maybe you've identified a 3 or 4 out of them. Roughly about 12 questions have been identified as moderate. You would have identified about 10 or 9, 10 of these and taken those questions. 9 questions that are difficult. The expectation that was that you are able to pick at least even 1 or 2 difficult questions and get into that. What about DM? DM, we've identified a 3 or 4 questions as easy, so expected attempts about 2 or 3 there. A large chunk of questions were marked moderate. There were a few tricky ones, which especially those questions that involve multiple options to be chosen or present option in the descending order were time consuming and therefore tricky. So roughly about 7, 8 questions can be marked as moderate to difficult or difficult. And you probably are expected to, take 1 or 2 of them. So if this is the way in which the classification of difficulty level is, then let's look at what the VA expected scores at percentiles are. So roughly around 16, 17 questions that are doable. We looked at a lot of VA, we looked at a lot of RC2 that we can pick and carefully do. So if I'm looking at about a 16 to 17 attempts at an expected accuracy of 80%, your 98 percentile will actually fall around a 13. So roughly a score of 13 could be marked as a 98 percentile, which means my higher percentiles, 99 would be a 14.50, 99.5 plus would be a score of 18 and above. Okay, 18 and above, quite achievable. If people have managed their time well, you could actually get through the entire sectional. You could solve every single question of verbal if you have allocated a 55 odd minutes to it. Okay. On the lower end, so 2 questions less than maybe 16, which is around 14 questions and a 80% accuracy. We're looking at a 11.25 as a score for 95 percentile. We're looking at a score of 10 for a 90 percentile. So around 12 questions or so. A score of 8.50 is what should fetch you an 80 percentile. And a score of 7.75 is what should fetch you a 75 percentile, right? What about the decision-making sectional? So we looked at the most difficult cases that were marked tricky. 2 questions of that Samardeep case, and then you had a couple of questions in that Ashish and branding management case. So if you take away 2 cases, which is like around 6 questions, right? Or maybe you've left out 2 questions in these different cases. So even if you take away about 5, 6 questions that you've not attempted, even at an attempt of about 15, 16 and an 80% accuracy there, you can definitely, get a 98 percentile, which is a score of 12.25 fetches as a 98 percentile, a score of 13.75, which is like 17 questions should fetch you a 99 percentile. A score of 16 plus should be a 99.5 percentile. Now on the lower side you have a score of 10.75, which should fetch you a 95 percentile. A score of 9.50, which should fetch you a 90 percentile. A score of 8.25, which should fetch you an 80 percentile, and a score of 7.25, which should fetch you a 75 percentile. Very much on the lines of the mocks that you've had, you'll find that difficulty levels, compositions of questions were pretty close to what you have seen in your EOMs, all right? So that is it from me as far as decision making and verbal ability is concerned. To give you an analysis of QA of the GK sectional and the very important overall picture is Shivam sir here. Shivam sir, can you please take over?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much. Hello, students. Good evening. Uh, Here we are with the live analysis of QA section of XAT 2021. I'll be also discussing a brief on GK section at a later stage. And finally, I'll discuss the overall percentile. So let's look at QADI section analysis of XAT 21. We'll be starting with topic distribution, followed by question mapping in terms of easy, moderate, and difficult. We discuss expected attempts and scores for the QA section and percentile versus score equivalence. So this is how the topic distribution looks like in XAT 2021. Time and distance, triangles, function. These are the three topics that XAT has exploited heavily. 8 questions just among 3 topics. Then there were 1 question each on multiple topics like linear equation, numbers, ratio, SICI, probability, logarithms, circles, and there were some new question types which were seen in this year's XAT and which was not visible in the recent year's exams. So those were cubes, clocks, a question based on magic square and coding. These are the new question types that I'm discussing about, right? These were not asked in XAT in the recent years. And there were 3 sets of data interpretation, each having 3 questions. So 3 questions on scatter plot, 3 questions on a caselet, which was based on shoppers of different categories, and there were 3 questions on data analysis, which was based on project ratings. Yes, a few topics of quantitative aptitude like percentage, profit loss, permutation combination, averages, time and work, coordinate geometry, they were completely absent from the paper. Let us look at question mapping of easy questions. So there was this question on ratio proportion where the passengers were traveling between 3 stations, that is A, B, and C. So A and B were the extreme stations. Okay, so few of the buses were traveling directly between A and B without a stoppage at C, whereas there was a set of buses which were stopping at an intermediate station, which was the C. So the ratio of the buses was given to us, and uh, among the buses which have intermediate station as the C, the ratio of passengers who are leaving the bus at station C and who are continuing their journey towards station B was also given. So we can simply assume a few numbers and take the ratio, which was of the total number of passengers which are traveling from A to B, and the number of passengers who are going by the non-stop bus. A question based on time and distance was given where deer was chasing a tiger. So the distance between deer and tiger was given in terms of deer's step. And then the ratio of the speed between deer and tiger was also given in terms of their steps as well as the length of the steps. So this was a very, regular textbook kind of question. A question based on triangle was given, which was based on application of a 30, 60, 90 triangle. We had to find out the ratio of the segments AB is to BC is to CA. We had to apply 30, 60, 90 as well as 45, 45, 90 triangle in order to solve this. A question based on logarithm was given where change of base concept was used. This was again a simple, straightforward question which was involving the application of change of base. Another question which was based on linear equation, or rather you can call it a word problem. This was based on eggs. So a person was buying certain number of eggs, then he keeps a certain number of eggs in refrigerator. He carries the rest of them to his mother's home. The mother keeps certain eggs in the refrigerator, and the permissible limit of the number of eggs that can be kept in the mother's refrigerator was 5. So you can calculate the number of eggs that the person bought initially. So again, this was easy question if you go by the options. A question based on simple interest, compound interest was given. So sum of 2 compound interest was 830. There were different principles given, different rate of interest given. Once again, you can exploit option rather than making an equation over here. Another question which was based on clock. So this question was simply asking you the minimum angle between the 2 hands of the clock between 2:30 and 3 p.m. So this was very straightforward question without any calculation. Another question based on time and distance, a standard question based on circular race, where the time required for all the four runners to complete one round was given. So obviously a well-prepared student would know that he is supposed to take an LCM in order to solve the question. A question set, rather a data interpretation set, which was based on a scatter plot, which was based on BMI of males and females, whose height, weight, age, and genders were given. So this was a straightforward set, except for the last question, which has very close options. Otherwise, the remaining questions were easily doable here. So this, according to me, is the list of easy question. Everybody should have, taken most of the questions out of this particular list, because these are the questions which will fetch you good marks. Let's look at question mapping of a moderate level question. So there was a question on triangles, where maximum angle in a non-equilateral triangle was to be calculated. So one of the side of the triangle was 1. The two other sides which were greater than 1, so the triangle was not equilateral. And we had to find out the maximum value of the angle. Another question which was based on circle, where the area between the polling circle was supposed to be calculated. So each of the two circles were passing from the center of the other. So whenever you get this information, the angle between the two circle, the radii of the two circle was obviously 60. And then you can have a third circle which has common chord as the diameter, and we had to find out the area between the first and the third circle. So this was quite doable question if you know the formula for the area of the sector and segment. A question which was asking for a minimum value of fx divided by gx. So fx was defined as x square plus 1 upon x square minus 1, whereas gx was defined as x plus 1 upon x minus 1. And if x is 1, both of them were having different values, like fx was 1 and gx was 3. So we had to find out the minimum value of fx by gx. A question based on functions was given, where x, y, z were positive integers, and it was given that x square minus y square is equal to 20. Now, just on the basis of this particular information, that is x square minus y square equal to 20, and x and y are positive integers, you can easily figure out the values of x and y. Okay, once you have the values of x and y with you, you can substitute that in the third equation to get the value of z. A question based on time and distance was given, where the boat was traveling in upstream and downstream directions. So this again was a very standard type of question, except for the last requirement which was given in the question. Question mapping of moderate and time consuming questions. So this was the question on triangle, which was based on similarity, right? It was very hard to understand that this question had an application of similarity, because it was nowhere directly mentioned. It was given in a form of word problem, where a person was traveling from one station to another station, and he ends up making two similar triangles while completing the journey. And once we established the similarity, we had to take the ratio of the sides and find out the length of the other sides. A question based on magic square was given, which was obviously doable, just that it might take some more time to solve this question. So there were a 3x3 grid given, and each cell in the grid was having a combination of variables. So rather you can call it terms, like 2x plus 3y, another was 2y square. So all 9 cells were filled with such terms in terms of x, y, and z. And the magic square had all rows, all columns, all diagonals totaling the same. So you can pick up any set of column or a row and start equating the values and make the equations in terms of x, y, and z, and you have to solve those equations. So definitely doable one, but slightly lengthy and on a time consuming side. A question based on coding was given, which might take some reading time and some time to process the data. But once you have understood the pattern in coding, the question was easily doable. A question based on caselet was given. So there were 3 questions here, where different types of shoppers were given. They were classified as male and female. They were happy, unhappy, and neutral. And they were first time customer and returning customers. So a total of 2 into 3 into 2, 12 categories. And to be able to find out the number of members in each category, you had enough data, just that there was an overflow of information in this particular set, and therefore it might be a time consuming question. Otherwise it was not at all difficult, just that you can find out everything provided you remain patient and allow sufficient time to yourself to solve this question and process the data. Question mapping of difficult level questions. So there was a question on cube painting and cutting. So this was not a standard cube cutting and painting question. Only 3 of the adjacent surfaces were painted, and then the cube was cut into 216 pieces. And we had to find out number of cubes where no surface painted. So this, according to me, was difficult question because you might miss certain number of cubes here and there. A question based on probability was given, which where there were 5 mobile phones at a store, 2 red, 2 black, and 1 white, and there were 3 customers walking into the store, and each had a specific requirement in his mind. We had to find out the probability that the requirement of all the customers were met. So this, according to me, was slightly tricky question. A question based on numbers, a magic number I can say, okay, because it was a 6-digit number divisible by all the prime numbers less than 15. Uh, Maybe 3 to 4 minutes into the into this question, and then you will realize that okay, this particular number applies the rule of divisibility for 1001. That is first 3 digits equal to the last 3 digits. So the number is divisible by 1001, and then it is also divisible by all the prime numbers, which are factors of 1001, which is 13, 7, 11, etc. So it will take some time for you to realize, maybe around 3, 4, 5 minutes easily, and therefore this was not at all to be done inside the exam. A question based on data analysis was given, which was once again a difficult set because it had good amount of information. Plus, once you start processing the combinations which were supposed to be considered, it takes significant time to process the data and arrive at a unique answer. So this, according to me, was difficult because it takes a lot of time to uh, complete the set. Let us look at expected attempts of QADI set based on our analysis of the difficulty levels. Sorry. So this is the overall picture. There were 11 questions of easy level that we have discussed, and we expect you to solve most of these questions because these are the ones where you get maximum return on investment in terms of time. So around 10 questions should be done from these 11 questions from a well-prepared student who is targeting around 98 percentile in this section. There were 5 moderate questions. We expect you to solve again a high number of questions here as well, which is 4 as an expectation. Moderate time consuming question, we at least expect you to solve 50% of these questions. And from difficult questions, we want you to avoid most of them, provided if you tumble upon one of the difficult question and if you happen to crack that, maybe one good attempt out of the 6 questions may be fine. So out of total of 28 questions, we expect that 18 should be a good number to attempt within 50 to 55 minutes into the QA section. So based on that, 18 is the expected attempts. We attach accuracy percentage of 80 to 85 percentage, and based on that, we expect 15 of these questions to be correct, 3 incorrect, which makes us reach the overall score in terms of expectation to 13.5, considering the negative marking for unattempted questions also. And this, as I said, the expected time is around 50 to 55 minutes. So a 13.5 score will be equivalent to 98 section. Look at the highlighted values. 13.5, the expected score is attached at 98 percentile. For people whom quant is one of the stronger area, should definitely do better than this. So 14.75 is 99 percentile, and 17.25 is 99.5 percentile in this section. For sectional requirement, 90 percentile becomes an important number, so that is at 10 marks in this particular paper. And for other sectional requirements like XLRI BM, XLRI HR, IMT Ghaziabad, and XIMB, you should keep 75 in mind, 80 percentile in mind, which is placed at 7 marks in this paper. We will also discuss a few few things about general awareness section. So this was part B of the paper. Over and above the first part that we have completed with 165 minutes time allotted and 75 questions, this was a separate part B, which had a sectional time limit of 15 minutes, and there were 25 questions of general awareness in this paper. There was 1 mark for every correct answer, and there are no negative marking in general awareness section. This question mainly revolved around the current affairs. It was heavily dominated by current affairs questions on technology, like online learning platform, questions on business leaders. One of the example is given here, that is of CCD, CEO. Question based on books and authors, and questions based on COVIDs were also present in the paper. There were a few questions on static GK, especially the match the following kind of questions. There were 2 of them, and there was one question of Satyagraha movement, which was also considered to be a static GK question. So this is how the overall scores and percentile looks like for XAT 2021. We have already discussed the sectional percentiles for VARC, DM, and QA sections separately. So let us focus on the overall numbers. So if you get a score of 17.75, you get 75 percentile overall. That is our prediction, definitely. A score of 20.75 should be equivalent to 80 percentile. 25.25 should be equivalent to 90 percentile. This becomes one of the key number over here, because 90 percentile will be an overall cutoff for a lot of colleges. So that number is 25.25 according to us. 95 percentile is placed at 30 overall score. Now this again will be a key number, because the 94 somewhere in the range of 94 to 95 will be the sectional will be the overall cutoff for XLRI HR course. So that should be in the range of 29 to 30 for this paper. 98 percentile is placed at 34.75, whereas 99 and 99.5 are respectively at 37.25 and 40.25. These are the approximate percentile cutoffs for leading colleges. So we can see XLRI BM over here, XLRI HRM, and XIMB and IMT Ghaziabad. These are the leading colleges available through XAT. So XLRI BM course is asking for 90 percentile in QA section, 80 percentile in VA plus LR section, and 80 percentile in DM section. These are the sectional cutoffs. Okay, not the precise one, but very approximate. Very close to the actual cutoffs. Okay, and overall cutoff for XLRI BM course is 96 percentile, and this, according to our analysis, is at 32 marks. The same values for XLRI HRM course will be 70 percentile, 85 percentile, and 75 percentile for the sectional cutoff of QA, VA, and DM section. The overall cutoff for XLRI HRM course should be somewhere around 94 percentile, which is placed at 29 marks in this paper. And XIMB as well as IMT Ghaziabad, the sectionals will be in the range of 70 to 75 percentile over here. And the overall will be around 90 percentile, which is placed at 25.5 marks in this paper. So this was the analysis of XAT 2021. We wish you all the very best for the results of XAT. Thanks for watching the analysis. Goodbye.